Okay. Well, like you said, I have a rare autoimmune disease. I have quite a few of them. I developed them after being exposed to toxic chemicals in the military. And I won't go into all the details that led up to when I actually had my cardiac arrest. It was a lot of in and out of the hospital, chronic end stage heart failure, and it came on really quick. But in January of 2017, that's when I started to go into this really severe arrhythmia, and my heart rate was just below what I had a defibrillator put in, and it was just below the threshold. So it wasn't shocking me out of it, but it was still really intense. And I was feeling that, something's wrong. And I knew I had to call the ambulance. So they took me to the hospital, and for 7 hours, they were trying to stabilize me. And all this time I knew I was going to die. I knew this was different than the other times, and that I could just feel my body dying. And so I was praying. I prayed like you wouldn't believe. It was a lot of prayers, trying to think of anything I could think of that, maybe I hadn't been sorry for. And I was confessing everything I could have ever thought I had done. And they ended up stabilizing me enough that they thought they could move me up to the ICU. The ER was filling up. So they got me into the ICU. But as soon as they transferred me from the ER bed to the ICU bed, the arrhythmias went really high. And they called the code blue, had the crash team come in, and my room suddenly filled up to almost 30 people. I mean, that might be an exaggeration. It was a small room. You've been in those hospital rooms. That it was full. There was a lot of people, and there were people coming in and out, people that were outside that were helping to pass things in and out. But it was real chaotic. And I just remember that, as they were strapping me down, because they had to strap me down, they were shocking me during this time. I think they were trying to lower my heart rate. And so there was periodic times that I was being shocked, but they strapped me to the bed so that I guess I wouldn't fall off of it or flop around too much or what. But I couldn't move my body or my head. And I was looking at this crucifix that was on the wall. And that was the only thing that was providing me peace, because of all the chaos. They're pulling your arms this way and your legs all over the place. And so I was still trying to do my prayer, but there was just that chaos. And, they were asking me a lot of questions like, hey, what's your name? What's your address? Things I knew they already knew. So at this point, I knew it must be getting really bad. They don't call code blue for nothing. But when they're asking me those questions, I know they just wanted to keep me present and keep me with them. I wasn't a real good believer. I didn't practice as much. And, after I started going, I went on to get my master's degree. And I think that kind of, that length of time in such an isolated bubble, in the school setting, it caused me to, have so much time dedicated to that, and then to work and family, that I just started to neglect my spirituality. But I didn't stop believing. I had to always believe, but this was definitely my most real prayer that I had in many, many years, and maybe ever, because, I was dying. So I was really praying. But I was a believer, but I can't say that I was a great believer. I had my flaws, and they kept calling out like certain organs were failing. My liver had failed, my kidneys were failing, my lungs were giving out. And, I have scar tissue in all of those organs from the disease, but it was unbelievable, all that was happening. And so I just laid back and I closed my eyes, and I thought, I just want to die. And I prayed to God. I'm like, I'm done fighting. I've never quit anything in my life, but this time I had enough. I said, God, just spare me of this. Take me out of this. I can't deal with it anymore. And, I was super comfortable at that point with just dying. I really wanted it. And I didn't answer any more questions. The doctors were asking me all kinds of those questions. And I said, I'm not answering anymore. And that was it. And it was hard to get that out. I mean, it was a force of my own strength just to be able to get those words out. And as I did, I just said, I'm ready. And as soon as I had said that, I felt this shake and this pop, and I could feel my soul actually leaving my body. And immediately all the noise, all the chaos, everything, all the pain, everything was gone. There were no negative emotions. I just felt like this rush of love enter into my soul. And I'm looking at this dark void as I'm feeling this rush come in. And I'm seeing that, I could look into this dark void. It looked kind of like outer space, but it didn't have all the stars and the planets and all that. And I thought, well, this can't be it. I could feel this love, but I couldn't imagine that was all there was this big dark space and a bunch of love. And as soon as I said that, I realized that I could see into this dark void. So there must be something that's shining into it. But I also could see, which I didn't realize how my abilities for my sight had changed, but I was seeing in 360 degrees. So I could see every which way around me. And so I realized there's a light behind me, and it was a magnificent light, really bright, large, beautiful light. And that is exactly where the love was coming from. It was just permeating into my soul. It was tangible. It was a palpable kind of love. It wasn't just like, you love somebody and you say it in life, and you kind of believe it, sure. But there was no doubt that this light was what was loving me. I'm realizing, I'm like, wow, God is love. All love comes from him. There is no love that doesn't exist without God. And I could feel that. And my intelligence went up like you couldn't even believe. As soon as I died, I was instantly smarter. I knew things that I had never even had any kind of access to in life. So there was just like, even time was so magnificently different there than it is here, because there was no time. There was no concept of it. It was as if everything that ever happened in eternity was in this little tiny pinpoint. Like everything was there, and I had access to anything that I wanted to look at. And it was all there at once without being chaotic, which just blows my mind still to this day, that I could sit there and look at, I didn't look at your life, but I could have. It was all right there. And it's kind of off in the periphery, but what I was looking at and focusing on is what grabbed my full attention. And so I was able to isolate all those different things and still be able to focus on the one thing that I really wanted to do. And that's where I was laying down all these new memories while I was actually dead, which is still, again, it blows my mind away. And so, I as soon as I saw this light, I turned to it, and I was just drawn to the light. It wasn't like I was forced to come to the light. There was nothing saying, hey, you know what, get over here. You got to come this way. It was as if my soul knew I belonged there. Like this was the one place that was really home. I can't sleep really well at other places. At home, I can sleep just fine. But this is what I felt like. It was like beyond what it feels like to sleep at home. This was like just the most welcoming, loving place you could ever imagine. And it was light. It blew my mind away. So I said, I want to be with that light. And as soon as I said that, I was there standing right before this light. But what was interesting is that I remembered every single step I took to get there. So it happened so quickly, but yet there's no way I could have all that much memory in that period of time. The whole time thing just throws you off. But so I'm standing there before this light, and my vision, not only could I see all these different directions, and everything all at once, but I could see far. And so this light was extremely vast. I mean, it went so far to the left, I couldn't see the end of it. And I could watch my vision as it was, trying to seek out the end. I could never find the end. So I looked to the other side, no end there, and up and down, same thing. So it was just absolutely all encompassing. This light was just massive. And I'm looking at it and I'm saying, I can't believe this light doesn't hurt my eyes. And, like I said, I knew this was God, but I didn't see like a body. So I didn't see, a facial feature or anything like that. So I don't know if it was just God's glory that was this light or what part of him. I don't want to try to, say all those kinds of things, but I know this was emanating from God or was God or something along that line, because this was definitely God. This was him interacting with me. And I'm looking at it, and as soon as I said I couldn't believe that this isn't hurting my eyes, God says, well, do you want to come in? And says, come on in. So I was like, well, yeah, I'm going in. So and that doesn't, I don't want to try to downplay the sovereignty of God, because I was so respectful, and it was like my soul was genuflecting to God. But yet he was so warm and welcoming. It's like my feelings and my emotions now are just so happy and enjoying, and like they were then. But it was also this awe. I was like in complete awe of God. And people always say that you should have a fear of the Lord. And if he was mad at me, I would have really been afraid, because I realized he could do whatever he wanted. But he's so gentle and so kind and forgiving. His mercy was just so wonderful. But when I started to go in, I felt like this love was going in at an even faster pace and more powerfully into my soul. It kind of felt like, like a straw, when you're drinking from a straw, and it's never empty. You're drinking, it goes from one place into the other. And that's what it kind of felt like, is like his love was going into me, and then it was flowing back out into heaven and kind of just recirculating. It never went away. It never was gone, but I never was emptied. It was like I was just constantly being filled with his love. And what he was doing is he was like shaving off all these ugly pieces of me, like all this hurt, all these, like that, just the fact that I had just died in a pretty horrific death. I didn't go into all the details, but it was in 7 hours. I still have some trauma from that. It was a terrible death, but he was shaving that off. So it was like, wow, he's healing me from anything. I didn't even care about dying. I didn't care about any insults or hurts that I had once cared about. All that stuff was gone. And so I'm walking through this light, and I said, well, I want to see Jesus. And as soon as I said that, it opened up. The light just opened up, and there was this massive room. And it was so cool, because in this room, there were like, I don't know how many beings it was. I've never seen a trillion, but I would bet it trillion. I could say it was any number that you could think of that was just so vastly large that you couldn't even have a concept of it in your mind. It was just a lot of beings, but there was this one being that was clearly, it was Jesus. There was, my mind, I knew who it was right away. There was nobody had to explain it to me. Nobody had to tell me, hey, over here, that's Jesus. They didn't have to do that. It was obvious that this was Jesus. But all these beings had they kind of look like under a microscope, you look at cells and they got all those little moving parts that are around, but those moving parts are like brilliant light, beautiful, just light that was just emanating from these beings. But Jesus, now his light was so vastly, it was the same light as what I had saw when I first got there. It was just this beautiful light, and it was reflecting out, and it was, I felt the love coming from all over, from the light of God, from Jesus. And the atmosphere was like a pinkish kind of green, and it was alive. Pinkish green is kind of a poor description, because I don't really understand what colors they were, but that was about as close as I can come. But it was that was the Holy Spirit. I could feel that he was connecting everybody to Jesus and God, and then all the beings were all connected together too. And it was this just kind of collective consciousness that was happening. And I was standing there looking at Jesus, and it was just so wonderful to be able to see him and to know. And I said, I want to see your face. And as soon as I said that, his face started to come together. So it went from this light just emanating from him. And as soon as his face came together, all the other beings were apparent to me too. So I could see everybody that was there. But they stayed off in my periphery. So I was completely fixated on Jesus. People always ask me, oh, did you see grandma there? Did you see so-and-so there? And, I believe I know who I saw there, but those memories aren't as clear as what I saw with Jesus, because that's what I was focusing on. And so I'm looking at Jesus, and his face was like just so beautiful, and it was smiling, but I couldn't remember it. Like as soon as it got to my eyes, I knew I was seeing his eye or his face, but I didn't have a memory of it. So every time that image came in, there was no memory being laid down. So I wasn't having anything to draw back upon. So I couldn't even, in my head, I couldn't see what his face looked like. In my head, it looked like just brilliant light, like just this flash of light that just was constantly permeating into my brain. But I could see that he was smiling. So it was kind of a hard thing to maybe I don't do a good job explaining it, but it was fantastic to me anyway, because he was just so wonderful. And the whole time I'm looking at him, I'm going through my own sins. I'm going through everything that I had done in life. And, all those memories that I said were in that pinpoint, I was pulling them up. I was like, wow, I did this. And I could see how I hurt those people, how it hurt me, but I could also see how it hurt Jesus. And to me, that was just, it was devastating in a way, because, I'm seeing just this ripple effect of my sins, things that I had done or hadn't done. And some of those were the worst things because, like I said, I confessed a whole bunch of sins, but the ones that I didn't recognize, the ones that I, even justified, I thought, well, I was right. This person was, rude to me, or they did this to me. And, so I have the right to defend myself. I still saw what I had caused in that life, or what it did to Jesus was really what was impacting me, because I felt his pain for that person. And so that was a really eye-opener for me. So I'm looking at him, and as we go through all of those sins, and he's just smiling the whole time, I realized I'm dead. And I said, well, at 6 years old, I had prayed to you and I asked for a long life, because I had saw my great grandmother's funeral, and all my aunts and uncles and all these people I love were crying because she was really beloved. And so I didn't want to be the cause of so much misery at that age. I was like, please, God. And that was, 6 years old. I prayed for a long time, an hour, maybe even longer. But a 6-year-old to do that, I don't know of a lot of 6-year-olds that sit there and pray that long. I'm sure there are some, but this was like a really heartfelt prayer. And then all of a sudden I felt that rush of like peace come over me, where that your prayer had been answered. While I was asking him, as I was standing before him now at 42, I asked him, I said, well, do you remember that? And he said, yeah, I remember that prayer, and it still stands. So he had answered it. That I knew he had, but he confirmed that he had. So he said, yeah, it still stands. And then he asked me, but why would you want to go back? And it wasn't like, trying to talk me out of it. It was, he wanted me to think about what was my reason for going back. And, I reflect on this a lot. And I think it was because he didn't want me to go back for the wrong reasons, things that are still out of my control. And the first thing that popped in my head was my family. And, he's patient, he's loving, and he's got a sense of humor. And he's like, well, everything you did in life, I was still there helping you the whole way. Don't kind of pat yourself on the back, because it wasn't you that's going to get them to heaven, and that's kind of the thing that I really, really had to recognize, is that, my kids, yeah, they might, do better with me here, but he still loves them every bit as much as he loves me. And so that realization, when he was saying that he loves my family and he wants to take care of them, it was as if he was teaching me that my reason to come back can't be solely for my family. I get to enjoy that anyway. That's a benefit of coming back. So I was really starting to think, and I realized I could do more for him. And it was this like strong desire. It really resonated with me. And that's when he said, yeah, that's it. And, I knew that's what I wanted to do. It wasn't even for me to, come back and live for him and then, die with more glory or something. I didn't even care about that. I just wanted to love him as I was feeling his love. It was almost uncontrollable that I just wanted to do this for him. And so he starts to tell me about how there are 3 things that I need to do then. And those 3 things are so important for me. It was that I need to pray more. And he was telling me that I need to pray more because that's how I keep my relationship with him. And so that made sense. But then he says that I needed to suffer joyfully. And part of this is that there wasn't going to be this miraculous healing for me, that I was going to have to come back and still suffer, and that, I had to be prepared for that. But it was also that as I'm seeing, God who came down, took on human form and suffered for us, and he's smiling and happy, I realized what suffering joyfully was for a greater purpose, and we have to have some kind of purpose to our suffering. And I have a purpose now because of that interaction. I don't know that I would have been able to do that suffering joyfully without that, unless I had that knowledge of what I'm doing, that purpose. And, he gave me that purpose. And so that became pretty easy. And then the last thing he told me to do was to share his love. And that is something that still, I find so appealing, because that's exactly what I wanted to do when I was there. Is I wanted to just give him love. I wanted to show him love and live for him. And what better way than to try to show love to others? And with that, he gave me this wonderful insight and grace that I just don't want to hurt anyone in any way. He changed a lot of things for me, where somebody will say something, and I'm still human. I still might say something that isn't quite as kind, or maybe a little impatient at a time, but I'm quick to apologize, to recover from that. So he really did help me even with how to share his love, because it's those little interactions, not recognizing something or doing something that we're just, we don't really count as being that bad, so it's not so high on the scale. But he was teaching me how to actually do those things. And then he said that I had to go back. And at this point, it was the only time that I felt any kind of discomfort while I was there. And it was more and more intense every step I took away from Jesus. And so as I'm going back, and I had to go back the exact same way that I came in. So I go through the light, and the pain's growing and growing. But then I see my tunnel, and this is something that I do kind of mention, but I don't really, like I said, everything else is in the periphery. So I didn't have to have anybody, have a sign or something that said, hey, this is Brian's tunnel. I knew which one was mine. It was quite intuitive. So I went into my tunnel, and at the end of my tunnel was no longer that dark void. It was my hospital room, and I could see my body, and it was as if I was looking at my body kind of from up here. So I'm looking at the hospital room, and I'm seeing all the faces of the hospital staff that were in there. And they had this big green machine on my chest, and it was doing chest compressions. And I later learned it's called a Lucas machine. And so I'd never seen one of those things before. So I was kind of interested in that anyway. And, the way it was moving was kind of bizarre. You seeing your body there. And so I was approaching this, and all of a sudden they took that off. And then I don't know if they were calling it at that point, because I had been dead for over 10 minutes. So I don't know what point they were going to call it, but it might have been at that point, because they took that machine off. But then when I got to my body, I didn't have to have any kind of explanation. It just, I naturally knew how to get back into my body, just went into it. And as soon as I did, I spontaneously revived, and I popped up like this. And that poor doctor, I don't know what he was thinking or what went through his mind, but this looked like he just got this startled look. And I said, did I just die? It was, kind of hard to talk, because they had tubes in my mouth, and they had, a lot of stuff, or not necessarily in my mouth, but they had a mask with a tube, and they were doing some oxygen and stuff like that. So they ended up having to come down to me. The doctor came right down by my face, and I said it again, did I just die? And I knew I had just died, but I didn't, I had never believed in NDEs, and I didn't believe in, kind of out of body experiences. I didn't believe in those things. I thought it was more of like neurotransmitters being released, and so I didn't have that kind of knowledge, but I knew I had died, and I wanted just to have the doctor tell me, yeah, we know you just died too. So he leans in, he's like, yeah, you just died. So that, I think he was very relieved that I popped back in and came back to life. But that was just amazing. And Well, they kept putting the oxygen on me, told me not to talk. So I was just smiling and enjoying that for a little while because, it was incredible for me. As worried as they all were, I was like, I just got told I'm going to be able to come back. So I'm not worried about dying right now. He didn't tell me how long I would live, but he did say I was going to suffer. So I knew, well, yeah, they broke a couple ribs with that machine. So I had some extra pain. Having died, that probably added some pain. But what was interesting, like what you said about the brain dying, one of the cool things, and particularly being a psychology geek like myself, I was really interested in the fact that as soon as I was there in that dark tunnel, that my emotions were gone. So that part of my brain was dead. I didn't have fear. And I had fear before I died. I had sadness, regret. I had, just disgust. I had all the range of emotions. I had everything, and it was all gone. The only thing that I could feel was love, but it's not the an earthly kind of love. It's not that kind of a emotion. It was so pure, and so that's interesting that you said that, because my brain clearly was dead for the emotion piece to be just gone. I was really impressed with that. But then, as far as going back to what your question was, is sharing my story, the charge nurse was really interested in asking me a lot of questions and a whole bunch of things, but she wasn't so interested in what had happened while I was dead. She was just asking a lot of questions. But I only wanted to talk about, well, guess what I just saw and, what happened. And I don't know that she was a believer. And yet she ended up telling everybody else, because all that week that I was still in the ICU, people were coming in from different floors. There were nurses and other people that were coming in asking me to tell them what happened. And, I was cool with that because it was fun to share my experience. But I remember that as they were working on me, because I had to get prepped to go to emergency surgery, they had to put in a new pacemaker and defibrillator up here, because the one that was on my side was, it had a lot of problems. It was too powerful and it wasn't shocking me at the threshold that they wanted it to be. So they just needed a different device in. And the pacing was great because that was, gave them more flexibility in how to control my heart until I was actually in heaven. And so I pulled on that memory myself. And so it was one of those interventions where God had acted in my life, and I was able to correlate that together and see the whole purpose and how that was to play out. And it was beautiful. But to even see the little times that you do something for somebody and then it aids God, it did provide comfort for him. It provided, we did what we're supposed to do. He loves that. He loves it when we do good, and particularly when we're doing good for others. And, I think he even probably likes it even more when we sacrifice something of ourselves for another person, because, there was a really strong message about how he had come down and took on this form. I mean, he's God. I mean, that's just, it's still, my mind is baffled by the fact that he is so humble to come down just to save us, and one of the things is that, he was telling me that, we weren't meant to die. Adam and Eve ate that apple. That's what brought death into the world. We were meant to be in communion with him. And he came down for that very reason, to restore us, to give us that opportunity to be restored to that communion with him. And when we do sacrifice, that's what we're doing. We're living the example that he set for us. He showed us the way to do this, is to love each other. He told us, love God first and then love your neighbor as yourself. Well, that wasn't, I always kind of thought that was hard. How am I going to, love my neighbor as myself? I can't just give them my house. I can't, give them my car, and nor would that necessarily be good for that person. And now I understand it. It's to try to help that person get to heaven, or at least not impede their progress. It's like, as Christians, I think, we have to be very bold in how we share our faith, but we also have to be careful and prudent and not, kind of shoving it down people's throats, because a lot of people are very sensitive to it, and they even hear you mention the name of Jesus and they get really worked up about it. But, it's like even now I get a lot of hate mail. It's unbelievable how many people hate Jesus, and they hate me for loving Jesus. And dear Heavenly Father, I want to praise your name. Thank you for everything that you have done for us. And we'd like to ask you, Lord, to please heal people who are hurting, people who are suffering, to give them the courage and the strength that they need to be able to make it through their days, and for them to hear your call and to feel your love. So many people are hurt and aching and crying out for your love, and they just need to have that little bit of help to be able to receive it, because it's there. And in Jesus' name, I thank you. Amen.